Outdoor Mavericks? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to go through the top 5 trout fishing baits for small ponds. So if you want to catch more trout on small ponds, stay tuned as I go through the top 5 baits and include additional tips and tricks to help you catch more trout the next time you hit the water. So starting the list at my number 5 trout bait for small ponds is going to be salmon eggs, trout eggs, and power eggs. Now I love fishing eggs for a couple reasons. One, when those trout want smaller baits, those eggs are a perfect size bait that the trout are going to go after. Now secondly, you can fish these eggs underneath the bobber or plunking off the bottom, and I highly recommend the plunking technique with the power eggs. Now one of the reasons why I love eggs on small ponds is when it gets super weedy, these eggs will go through and they won't disintegrate like power bait or soft baits. Now you'll be able to keep this bait on the hook longer, and even with a little bit of grass and you tug on it, you won't lose fish, and sometimes those fish will find this bait in the grass and they'll go after it. Now depending on the time of the year that you're fishing eggs, use different scents and different techniques depending on the water conditions, and it'll help you catch more trout. Now coming into my number 4 trout bait for small ponds is actually going to be mice tails. Now fishing under small ponds, you can fish mice tails both off the bottom plunking, or you can fish these underneath the bobber. Now my favorite technique with the mice tails on a small pond is underneath the bobber. You cast it out there and you reel it in, maybe giving it a few jigs every once in a while. With those mice tails underneath the water, you'll get a little bit of motion and it'll attract the attention of the trout. And especially if you're fishing bobber and mice tails on windy days, that bobber will move across the water and it'll give that natural motion of the mice tail instead of giving it a little action yourself. On days when there's calm and no wind, definitely give this a little bit of a motion. Reel it in every once in a while. Give it a little bit of a jig and pull on it a little bit just to give that mice tail a little bit of motion. And I love mice tails because they also come in a lot of different colors, but you can also dab a little bit of scent gel on them. So depending on the time of the year, whether it's spring, summer, or fall, when I like to fish these the most, you can add a little bit of scent to these and attract the trout. And I've also found that the mice tails are super durable, and especially fishing small ponds underneath the bobber, you can hook up 5, 10, I've even hooked up 15 trout on one mice tail over the course of 2 days. So these are super durable and they'll last a really long time. So when you grab some mice tails and head to the pond, you better expect some really good fishing, and when you find those trout, you're gonna have some epic days with the mice tails. Now coming in at the number 3 trout bait for small ponds is gonna be spinners. Now when it comes to trout fishing, spinners are one of my all-time favorite baits to go chase trout. And on small ponds, they can be super deadly. Now when I'm out on a small pond, I'm looking for certain conditions to give me the indicator that it's gonna be a good spinner fishing day. Now if you're seeing a lot of trout break the surface, go after flies and grubs on the top of the surface, you need to grab a spinner right away. And when you're seeing those trout surface, get your spinner out, go cast it out there, and reel it in once it hits the water. You want that spinner in that first top foot of the water, and I guarantee you if there's trout around, you're gonna get bites. And sometimes you might even get a bite every time you send out a cast. Now when it comes to the time of the day for casting spinners, I'm usually an early morning guy and a late evening guy. Now the seasons I like casting spinners on small ponds is in the spring, summer, and early fall time. However, if the small pond that you're fishing has a lot of grass and a lot of weeds, and after that casting you're retrieving in and you got a whole salad that you're bringing in, that gives me an indication that the grass is really high and that spinners are not something that you should be going with. So in the springtime and in the summertime, when the grass is not too high or tall in those small ponds, that's when I like to go with the spinners. However, in the late fall time frame though, you can get away with spinners in certain circumstances depending on where you're fishing. And of course my favorite spinner for going after trout on small ponds is the Yakima bait rooster tail. The rooster tails come in all sorts of colors, different blade colors, different weights, different sizes, and the rooster tail near the hook, which you can add scent to, which I think will be a game changer on small ponds when you're trout fishing. Now coming in at my number 2 trout bait for small ponds is going to be power bait. And for me, when I'm fishing small ponds, power bait is the first thing that I usually go to unless the trout are surfacing, in which then I'll go straight to spinners. But for the most part, I'm starting out with power bait to really see where those fish are in the water column and seeing where I can go find them. Now for what power bait colors and scents, glitter, non-glitter, which one should I use on small ponds, I have a content playlist of power bait videos that you should check out. I'll also add it in the description below. I got a link up here as well. I go through a ton of different power bait tips and tricks for different times of the year and using different colors depending on the conditions. Power bait for small ponds, I like plunking off the bottom, of course, earlier in the season. However, don't overlook putting power bait underneath the bobber. As the season's going along into the late spring, the summer, and even the late fall time frame, when you got grassy areas or thick grass on those ponds, those trout might be higher up and towards the surface of the water. Power bait underneath the bobber can be a really effective technique in really weedy and grassy areas, especially as the summer and the warmer days roll around. Now, if I'm fishing a new pond that I've never fished before and I'm looking and I don't see a lot of grass, my typical rule of thumb is an 18-inch to a 36-inch leader, and typically I'll start in the middle and either go shorter or longer depending on what I'm seeing and how the bite is going. But don't overlook power bait underneath the bobber. It's a technique that a lot of people don't think about because traditionally you want to plunk power bait off the bottom of a lake, pond, stream, or wherever you're trout fishing. So give the power bait underneath the bobber a shot and you're going to probably see your hookup and land ratio increase for trout in that summertime. And my number one trout bait for fishing for small ponds is gonna be worm. Now for worms, I like to fish these actually a couple different ways. One, I'll actually fish worms off the bottom of the small pond. In the early time frame of the season, I'll get a little split shot and some extra weight, and I'll get that worm closer to the bottom in the strike zone. Now there's the traditional and the most effective way for fishing worms on a small pond, which is underneath the bobber. And the reason why I have worms as the number one trout bait on small ponds is just because of that bobber and worm setup. Most small ponds get super grassy super fast in that spring and the summertime, so it's more of a top water or near the top water bite, which means you gotta go with spinners or your bobber and worm fishing, which I think is probably the most effective way and will catch you the most trout. In those warm and sunny summer days, the trout like the worms the most, so this is the technique and the setup that I like to use. Plus, when I'm fishing worms, I just love to yell bobber down and set that hook when you've got that worm in there. And one tip that I'll give you guys when you're fishing worms, a lot of people will fish natural and real night crawlers. However, Berkeley's got imitation night crawlers as well as fake worms that you can use. And honestly, I found that these last longer, they're a little bit more effective, especially on the hookups when it comes to fishing worms underneath the bobber. And you've got some different colors of worms, like I've got pink right here, so you can play around with some different colors and you can add scent to these, which I think is critical in those sunny summer days when the fish can be a little bit finicky. So the next time you head out to the small pond, make sure you load up on worms, maybe grab some real night crawlers, and some fake ones, and make sure you got a little bit of scent to go with these, and get ready to catch some big trout and yell bobber down. All right guys, and that's my top 5 trout fishing baits for small ponds. I hope you guys learned something new and got some tips and information out of today's video. And especially if you're just starting out or if you're a young kid, fishing small ponds, especially after they've been stocked, will give you an opportunity to go out and test different baits, different colors, different styles. So for you new anglers, go find a small pond and go out and trout fish. Learn the techniques, use these baits, and go out there and catch some fish and have some fun. So hit that like button on the video, guys. Subscribe if you love trout fishing tips, and other outdoor content. And don't forget, and as always guys, the outdoors is a gift, share it with others.